ידידי הגנרל אוסטין, חזרנו עכשיו מערכת מצב בבור הפיקוד. חזית במו עיניך במראות הזוועה, ספגנו מכה קשה מאוד. אנחנו נתחקר ונפיק לקחים. נהיה חזקים יותר. אבל עכשיו עת מלחמה, ובעת מלחמה המטרה היחידה והראשית היא לנצח. בימים האחרונים התהפכה המגמה, ומי שתקף אותנו הפך להיות מותקף על ידינו. מקרבות ההירואיים בשטחנו, בהם היכו לוחמי צה"ל בסדיר ובמילואים, את מי שתכנן להגיע הרבה יותר רחוק מרצועת עזה, עברנו למתקפה על שטחי רצועת עזה. התוצאות יעבירו לעולם מהי נחישותנו, מהי עוצמתנו, וכיצד אנחנו מתמודדים עם מי שמנסה להרוג את ילדינו, את זקנינו ואת נשינו, ולצערי במקרה הזה גם הצליח.
All right, that is the Israeli Defense Minister speaking along with U.S. Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin present in Tel Aviv. Now this comes amid a flurry of high-level visits coming in from the West to Israel in support of a complete backing of the Israeli regime.
Been in close touch, but it's good to see you again in person. And it's good to be back in Israel, even during such terrible days. As the U.S. Secretary of Defense, I am here in person to make something crystal clear. America's support for Israel is ironclad. And I extend my deepest condolences to the Israeli people for those killed or wounded in this terrible slaughter by Hamas. I'm also here in solidarity with all the families still living the waking nightmare of not knowing the fate of their loved ones. And we will continue to coordinate closely with Israel to help secure the release of the innocent men, women, and children in the clutches of Hamas, including American citizens. Now, Israel is a small country, a place where everybody knows everybody. And in times of trial, the intimacy of your society deepens the intimacy of your grief. But that's not a weakness. It is a profound strength. And in times of testing, Israelis know what to do. Over this awful week, we've seen Israeli hotels and homes take in those who've had to flee. We've seen long lineups to donate blood. We've seen WhatsApps explode with messages as people race to support neighbors in anguish. And perhaps because I'm a retired general, I was especially moved by the story of a retired general named Noam T-Bone. His son called him on Saturday from his home near Gaza to say that Hamas terrorists had stormed their kibbutz and were closing in. And the retired general jumped into his car in Tel Aviv and raced toward the combat zone. He linked up with other fighters and rescued his son, his daughter-in-law, and his granddaughters. And when the general arrived at their house, one of his granddaughters just said, "Grandpa's here." And these are rays of hope in a terrible week. And in times like these, sometimes the best thing that a friend can do is just to show up and to get to work. Now, this is no time for neutrality or for false equivalence or for excuses for the inexcusable. There is never any justification for terrorism. And that's especially true after this rampage by Hamas. And anyone who wants lasting peace and security for this region must condemn and isolate Hamas. Hamas does not speak for the Palestinian people or their legitimate hopes for dignity, security, and statehood and peace alongside Israel. As a former commander of Central Command, the deliberate cruelty of Hamas vividly reminds me of ISIS. Bloodthirsty, fanatical, and hateful. And like ISIS, Hamas has nothing to offer but zealotry, bigotry, and death. The world has just witnessed a great evil. The deadliest attack on civilians in the history of the state of Israel, and the bloodiest day in Jewish history since the end of the Holocaust. So make no mistake, the United States will make sure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself. And Israel has a right to protect its people. You know, and there are many phone calls this week. President Biden has told Prime Minister Netanyahu that the United States would also respond swiftly and decisively to such a massive terrorist assault. And the president also underscored that democracies like ours are stronger and more secure when we uphold the laws of war. Terrorists like Hamas deliberately target civilians, but democracies don't. This is a time for resolve and not revenge, for purpose and not panic, and for security and not surrender. At President Biden's direction, we have moved urgently to respond to this crisis and to send a strong message of deterrence. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group is now in the region, led by the largest aircraft carrier in the world. We've augmented U.S. fighter aircraft squadrons in the Middle East, and the U.S. Department of Defense stands fully ready to deploy additional assets if necessary. As President Biden has said, for any country, for any group, or anyone thinking about trying to take advantage of this atrocity, to try to widen the conflict or to spill more blood, we have just one word: don't. The world is watching, and so are we. And we aren't going anywhere. We will remain in close contact with our valued partners across the region, and security assistance from the Department of Defense is already rapidly flowing into Israel. That includes munitions and air defense capabilities and other equipment and resources. It also includes more interceptors for Iron Dome to save Israeli lives. And we will continue to ensure that Israel has what it needs to keep itself secure. Now, Hamas attacked at a time of global challenge. But the United States is the most powerful country in the world, and we remain fully able to project power and uphold our commitments and direct resources to multiple theaters. So we will stand with Israel even as we stand with Ukraine. The United States can walk and chew gum at the same time. And U.S. security assistance to Israel will flow in at the speed of war. And as this harrowing week draws to a close, and as Shabbat draws near, we stand together, and we stand strong. The United States has Israel's back, and that is not negotiable, and it never will be. And after this terrible week, I wish you and all the people of Israel Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
We'll be starting with the questions, starting with Alon Ben David, Channel 13.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Your presence in the Eastern Mediterranean clearly projects power, but should Israel be attacked from the north, from Hezbollah in Lebanon, will you be willing to exercise your force and join the fighting?
I ordered additional assets to the region to bolster deterrence. And again, the message that we would send to any country or group thinking to take advantage of this situation and widen the conflict, don't. I won't speculate on anything that could happen in the future. I will just tell you clearly that the United States will continue to support Israel's right to defend itself.
Please, a question to the Defense Minister. השר גלנט, דיברת בתחילת השבוע על כך שהמטרה של המבצע היא למחוק את חמאס. ואזרחי ישראל שואלים את עצמם מה המשמעות של זה. האם תוכל להסביר לנו מה אתה מקווה להשיג במהלך הצבאי שלך ואיך הוא אמור להסתיים? באיזה מצב חמאס יימצא?
אנחנו נמוטט את שלטון החמאס, אנחנו נחסל את היכולת הצבאית של חמאס, אנחנו נוודא שהאיום הזה לא קיים בגבולות שלנו, זה יהיה ממושך, זה יהיה קטלני, זה יהיה עוצמתי וזה יהיה לתמיד.
Matt Seiler, ABC.
Thank you both for doing this. Secretary Austin, the U.S. administration has told Israel to avoid causing civilian casualties and to uphold what you called just now the laws of war. Given how Hamas fights, deliberately launching operations from dense civilian areas, how could Israel permanently end the terrorist threat posed by Hamas without inevitably risking many civilian lives? And as we watch the civilian death toll in Gaza rise while Israel conducts its counterattacks and perhaps a ground invasion, do you believe the moral culpability for those Palestinian deaths belongs to Israel, Hamas, or both?
I'll leave it to Israel to talk about its potential plans and its approach to conducting operations. Matt, I'll just say again that Israel has a right to defend itself, and we will support Israel's right to defend itself. We will continue to flow in security assistance. And I've worked with Israeli forces over the years, over many years. As you know, I wore a uniform for 41 years. My experience in working with the Israeli forces is they are professional, they're disciplined, and they are focused on the right things. And so I expect that going forward, they will continue to exhibit that same degree of professionalism that we've seen in the past. But you know, Matt, we've seen this before. The international community fought ISIS, who in some cases was embedded deeply in built-up areas. And that international coalition fought valiantly and protected civilians and created corridors for humanitarian movement, even in the midst of a pretty significant fight. So again, this is a professional force. It is well led, and I have every expectation that it will be disciplined.
Thank you. And for Minister Gallant, have you seen evidence that Iran was directly involved in planning or executing the recent attack on your country, or any signs that either Iran or its proxies are seeking to exploit the situation? And if you do come to see signs of an imminent attack on Israel, are you in favor of preemptive strikes?
Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas is one axis, an axis of evil. Everything is directed generally from Iran. The permission is given by Iran. The money is supplied by Iran. And the ideas are shaped in Iran. Therefore, it doesn't matter if they give or didn't
All
give.
right, that was a joint statement followed by a press conference by the U.S. Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin, and also present is Israel's Defence Minister. This is coming in from Tel Aviv, and this is the latest. Now, Lloyd Austin extended America's support for Israel and called it ironclad. Austin also said that it is closely working with Israel to help rescue hostages held by Hamas, not just Americans, but all nationalities. Now, remember, at least 25 Americans have already lost their lives in the war that has entered the 7th day today. Austin also said that this is not the time for neutrality. Those questioning why US is backing Israel completely and not talking about what is happening in Gaza. Now, Austin's visit, remember, comes a day after US Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Tel Aviv and told Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu personally that US will continue to stand along Israel. And in today's press conference as well, Austin clearly mentioned that US's support to Israel will be very similar to what US has been doing in Ukraine. Now, to discuss this further, we are being joined by Ambassador Volker Stanzel. He is a former German ambassador to China and Japan. Ambassador, welcome to the broadcast. Thanks for speaking to WION at this moment. I want to take your quick updates. We are just being told that U.S. Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin has, of course, reached in Tel Aviv, and he was just giving his joint statements. What are your first thoughts about this flurry of visits that we are seeing from the West in Israel to extend its support?
Well, what else can Israel's friends do but to show solidarity? The U.S. did so. Our own German foreign minister has arrived this afternoon in Tel Aviv too, to also assure Israel that Germany is at the side of it. It does not have any military implications in the case of Germany, but in the case of the United States, definitely it has. And I think this is an important message at a time in Israel when many people there fear that their armed forces, famous as they are, or their intelligence services, equally famous as they are, have not been up to the challenge posted by Hamas.
Right. Ambassador, I want to read out a statement to you before I go to my next question. This statement says, cutting off men, women, children of water, electricity and heat are acts of pure terror and war crimes. Now, this statement was by EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen. She made this statement in reference to what Russia did to the people of Ukraine. I want to ask you, why did the moral compass change when it came to the people of Gaza?
I don't see that it actually has changed. As you have also seen, read and heard, I think is that most or many leaders in Europe and also the United States actually have made a point that the war that is going on, of course, has to follow the legal requirements that confine any kinds of war.
All right. Now, yesterday, the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was in Tel Aviv, and he had said that Hamas does not represent the Palestinians. He went on to speak about what Hamas stands for. You know, right after that statement, we spoke to some residents of Gaza, and they accused Washington of not only being a bystander in the decades-old occupation, but in fact be a party to it. I want to ask you, do you think U.S. entirely understands the fundamental issue that is playing out in Israel and Gaza at the moment?
Well, you see the problem that not only the US, but other observers, other friends of Israel faced over the last, let's say, decade, is that the Israeli government was less and less interested to work towards a two-state solution of the Israel-Palestine problem, which is something that the international community basically had agreed on. Instead, the Israeli governments over the years, again and again, reinforced their support for illegal settlements on the West Bank, something that had been condemned by the United Nations and other international agencies. However, at the same time, we saw that from various sides, it's not just Hamas, the various Palestinian organizations that employ terrorist means of combat. So how to place yourself in a situation like that? We appealed to Israel to return to working for a two-state solution. At the same time, we condemned terrorist acts when they occurred. Nobody, of course, expected something that happened, that it would happen at the time. So on the one hand, I think, yes, sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. You mentioned the two-state solution. I want to ask you, it is completely off the table, or what do you think, what's happening at the moment?
From the point of view of the present Israeli government, the pre-war cabinet, I think it was off the table, and they have said so many times, and they have to return to it. There is no other way to solve the problem, as I think the present situation shows. You see, Hamas, of course, does not stand for the Palestinian people. There's hardly any real relationship between the government in Ramallah and Hamas people and other Palestinian organizations. They work on their own, they work with terrorist means, and that is not a way towards a solution, nor is the attack that Hamas launched just last week. So we have to return. Both the Israelis and the Palestinians have to work towards a two-state solution. I cannot see any other way to solve the problem long-term.
Right. Ambassador Stanzel, speaking of solutions, with the kind of statements coming in from Biden and Blinken in the last 6 days, or US as a whole, do you think United States should be on the peace table?
I do not understand the question. The United States should be?
As in, I'm asking if at all there's a peace table in the future where we talk about the conflict and the solution to the conflict. Do you think United States should be on the table? Do you think it can mediate between the two sides where it could lead to peace?
Yes, I think it can. I think the US has tried during the last 5-6 years with promoting the Abraham Accords, that it can play a mediating role between Arabs who are willing to accommodate some of Israel's wishes at least, and the Israelis themselves, even led by a government like that of Netanyahu. So they must have the Americans must have a place there. But I think the table must be at the United Nations, and the peace process will have to be guided by the United Nations, because you have no other international institution that represents the international community's interests in resolving the conflict as much as the United Nations.
All right, Ambassador Stanzel, thank you so much for speaking with us from Berlin. It was a pleasure speaking to you.
You're welcome.